Hello, everybody. I would like to share my experience with you about what it's been living in Canada for 10 years. It's a bit of a milestone. And I took some notes and I try to remember anecdotes and things that I think might be useful. But this is a personal story, so some things may or may not be relatable to you. But I think they will bring a perspective that I think is useful. A lot of what we hear these days is negative. Um, a lot of it is true and fair, as you'll see by the end of this video. But I'll share with you what my experience has been and why we moved to Canada, why we stayed in Canada for that long, and where we're at today. So, moved to Canada in 2014. I was in Singapore with my wife and our first child, and we decided to move to another country where we could grow the family. We decided not to stay in Singapore because Singapore has very strict visa rules. It's really hard to plan ahead. It's really hard to secure permanent residency. It was then, still today, is a very opaque system too, where you apply, you get rejected, but they might tell you what you're missing, or a suggestion, not what you're missing, but rather suggestion of what you could do to improve your chances. But is not a very clear system where you know what needs to happen for them to approve your application. So it is really hard to obviously build a family thinking that you could lose your job, and with that your permit, and you have to leave your country suddenly within a few months. And so that's really hard to do when you have a family. It's easier when you're by yourself. And so to Singapore's laws, I can say that today, and I'm very saddened to say, because it was hard to part ways with Singapore. We decided to find a place to move to, and to grow the family. So we looked at the usual when you're in Singapore, a lot in Singapore, Hong Kong, anyway, Southeast Asia and some other places in Asia. People look at Australia and New Zealand, and otherwise Canada and the U.S., parts of Europe, or the Middle East. So we decided that Canada was, being European, was kind of, Canada was a bit of a crossroads between, what it would be being in North America and in a more of a welfare state type system that I was more accustomed to. I'm not gonna say I was um, inclined to um, living in Canada because it was a welfare state, but I will say that the fact that it was a welfare state and that it provided healthcare and a number of other things that I was accustomed to as a European provided the safety net that I think was necessary for me to say, yeah, sure, let's go to Canada. Education will be fair, there will be healthcare, and it seems like a more fair system. That's how it looked like to me. Obviously, I had no clue. I had, as a matter of fact, never been to Canada before that. And discussing with my wife, I said, well, look, we have a growing family, we have children. Obviously, we're definitely going to contribute, higher taxes to this system, but we're obviously going to be benefiting from this, much like you would do if you live in Europe. I think is fair, and so let's go. And so you know, we moved to Canada. And so the way I did that is that I was running my own business. Back then, it was a tech business, and I also realized there were lots of gaps in the way I was tackling the business, the way I was trying to grow the business. There was just a lot I didn't know, and I thought, well, if I do a master's degree in tech and innovation, that could, science innovation, that could help me better run my business, and I could also meet people, and I could fundraise and do lots of other things. And I'll already be in North America, much easier to travel to the U.S. and so on. So, I mean, long story short, that's really, that's, how I landed in Canada. I moved to Canada as an international student, and um, took my business with me. So I incorporated the business right away. Shortly after, I graduated, and, I grew the business, and I mainly grew the business in the U.S. And well, I did that for a few years. Concurrently, though, um, uh, my wife's experience was different. So while I was going to class, and we had a 1-year-old child. So while I was going to class, my wife was going to work, right? So that's a difference between the U.S. and Canada. So in Canada, if you the spouse of uh, of of a student of an international student is allowed to work, whereas in the U.S. The spouse is not allowed to work. So my wife had worked in aviation before for a number of years in Singapore, and now she was working for a Canadian airline that I won't name. But she took the night shift at that time, right? So she was trying to grow and learn the aviation business on the supply chain side. So she decided to accept an offer that was really interesting from what it allowed her to learn a lot about, learn new skills and learn more about the industry. But unfortunately, it was a night shift. It was a rotating shift, but in the end, they ended up giving her more night shifts than to other people in the team, and that was the beginning of a bit of a realization to me about Canada. Is that I feel that, in Europe, for instance, if you have a child that's still, for instance, breastfeeding, so 1 year old or whatnot, and they wouldn't prioritize you for a night shift. They would say, well, yeah, so here's the team. They're younger people who are not even married. So you know the the woman who is breastfeeding and has a 1 year old should not be you know the one taking more or given more night shift responsibility, given her personal situation. That's something that in Canada wouldn't. It was something that was not done. So and that was the beginning of something that really bothered me, right? So that's one thing. The second is there wasn't like an extra pay for overtime work. So in Europe, usually it's like 1.5 or maybe two times your pay, depending on the company. I mean, at least that's how it was when I was there a while back. And she wasn't getting that either. So the pay was quite low. The conditions were, again, driving at night, and this is Eastern Canada, so rough weather conditions, and overall in Canada, anywhere you are in the winter, it gets really rough. Driving at night is never safe, and we did that for a while. Rent was pretty inexpensive in Atlantic Canada. I would say Eastern Canada, Atlantic Canada at that time. So that means we rented a two-bedroom apartment for like, I don't know, the equivalent of $700 US a month. With utilities maybe 800 plus or whatnot. It was rather inexpensive, honestly. I mean, I would say it was fair. Let me use the word fair because inexpensive is relative, but I would say it was fair. And I mean, based on income and so on. And food was okay. I mean, it wasn't inexpensive, but it was also nothing like today, right? So was gasoline, wasn't too expensive either, and a number of other things. So life was fine, and we were able to cope, and we were not able to take our kid to daycare because that was really expensive. So we kind of took turns, and I was going to class in the morning, and I was coming, my wife, and then we had a nanny who, we were living on campus, so then a nanny who was a student on campus, like a young 19, 20-year-old student. um, she would take care of my kid when I was in class, and then after class I would just run up to the unit, and then I would just be with my son, and my wife would be sleeping, and then at like 6 or 7 p.m. I would drive her to the airport where she worked, near the airport, and then I would pick her up because she didn't have a driver's license. I would pick her up at like 4 or 5 a.m. Brutal, right? And then I would go back to bed for a couple of hours and then go to class. And I did that for a while. So, um, uh, in, to me, I was really busy working, and obviously I was doing that, but I was really busy working and studying and doing all of that. And my wife was really busy, sort of growing her career and learning about the aviation industry, which was great for her. And in hindsight, again, that was the right thing to do and everything. Just the conditions, they just didn't feel like it felt really rough. It felt really hard, and and to actually, yeah, to just make it overall, things weren't necessarily very expensive, but you were not really being paid very well, and well, you're young, so you don't really, you just work. you 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 just do what you need to do, and you just work harder if you need to, right? Remember the book Animal Farm? The horse just, throughout the book keeps saying, I work harder, I work, and the last thing, he says is, I work harder, and then he dies, right? I think that's how it all started. That was kind of our experience in Canada, was kind of working hard, working harder, until 5 years later we decide to, putting up with the situation, work, work that doesn't necessarily pay much, and an economy that is rather flat. Slowly, inflation was on its way up, but it was quite smooth, right? So inflation was going up, and housing was getting more and more expensive. Of course, we didn't save for to buy a house, so again, in hindsight, sure, we should definitely buy a house. Back then, houses in Atlantic Canada were, on average, 2 3 bedrooms. You could buy one for like, 100, 130, whatever, K Canadian or so, under 100, K US. But we didn't, and 4 5 years later, we decided, okay, we need to leave. This place is getting really expensive, and it doesn't make any sense, so we left, and we went to the Yukon territory. And we went to the Yukon because I had the personal opportunity to build something new and contribute to something really cool, a really cool project. And the way it was sold to me, it really made a lot of sense, and I was really excited. And I said, Yukon, I go anywhere for something like this. I just go anywhere, right? So I'm very mission driven, and I did not care about the fact that it was just really remote. And they flew me over there for a couple of weeks in January. They said, well, here, we're going to fly you before you sign the contract. We fly you here in January, which is kind of like the hardest, time of the year to move to the Yukon. And if you feel okay after a couple of weeks, then fine, then sign and move, with your family to the Yukon. We want you here, right? So I did. I went there for January. It was so cold. I don't know, -40. Just the whole those couple of weeks that are really rough in the Yukon. It gets really, really cold. Cold as I've ever been in my life, but I still, the opportunity was worth it, and I was really excited. So I just moved there. I was there for a couple of years, a little over 2 years, and the pandemic hit, and of course the pandemic was, just hard on everybody everywhere, right? And I mean, it just wasn't, the way they handled it to me, of course, again, looking back, they could have done things very differently. They asked us to isolate in a place that was already, I mean, as isolated as it gets, right, with just a few people, and they wouldn't allow you to, go to places, the grocery store, places will shut, and you have to keep this social distance. But I'm talking about a place that is very remote and very isolated, and will people just rarely get to socialize, for a lot of reasons, right? Obviously, weather plays a big role in that. But salaries are higher, sure, but the cost of living is also a lot higher. And then government is really, it's a big, a big government is a problem in Canada. The size of the government in the territories is, it deserves a video of its own. It's and the situation in the territories just deserves a video of its own. So I'm gonna leave it at that. The thing is, we were there for a couple of years, and it was fine. We had another child up there. Really happy about that, our second one. And then we decided to move to, Alberta, Calgary, as a matter of fact. And we loved it. And I think we arrived in Calgary just on time to buy property, and we finally bought our first property in Canada after many years living in Canada, and paying, for someone else's mortgage, and but trying to figure it out where we wanted to be long term. Which, in hindsight, again, that's probably another video. When is the right time to buy property. We should have bought a property probably right away, but we waited because we thought, well, a home is really this place where you're gonna, you build your life around. You want to stay in the city for a long time. You don't want to move because you've grown a family and so on. Fine. We should have never done that. We should have bought it sooner, but we finally bought it in Calgary. But I think by then we were probably burned out. And then it was right after the pandemic and so on. And we bought the house just at the right time where interest rates were fine. They already had gone up quite a bit, but not by a lot. And it wasn't 6-7% whatever it's hit recently. But that kind of is, that kind of is how we landed in Alberta, the place that we probably should have gone to right away. That should have been our first destination, but we ended up in Atlantic Canada. And what I think is relevant to me as far as what's happening today, and because what's happening is Canada was kind of affordable when we first landed. A few years later, it started to get more and more expensive. Wages, were never adjusted really to inflation, and then housing prices are never really truly um, uh, um, something that's considered when when we speak of inflation in general. Or governments don't really, rarely think of the housing market to then tackle and discuss wages and real wages and purchasing power, unfortunately. And I think over the years things got worse and worse. And by the time we got to Alberta, obviously it was, I mean, it was great, and and lots of things like energy is a lot, is definitely more affordable, which made a huge difference to us. And having a growing family, we had a third child in Calgary, and by then we had three kids, and we had a bigger house, and you could say, well, that's great, and that's looks like success. And the truth is, yes, I could say personally, yes, that was, I mean, the amount of work in between, and I'm not getting into all the jobs and all the things that I did to persevere and to make it. I think they were too much work for what we got in return. And looking back, obviously now I'm in my 40s and thinking, okay, what type of wisdom can I then share with you out there? Young people thinking about or early late 20s 30s overseas thinking about moving to Canada, and young people in Canada thinking, what should I do? Should I stay? Well, I say this is probably not a great time to be in Canada, to be truthful. I think probably the conservative government is going to win next year, and they should, because we need to, obviously things need to change in Canada. It does not matter whether what my political inclination is. I mean, it's just a matter of facts. The things have to change, and the current government is huge. Things have to change, and the Liberal government is not going to change it. So change will not happen from within this existing government. It's just going to be a next government that's going to have to that will have the opportunity to change things, and so that will take a couple of mandates. You will not really see real change in Canada. I mean, truly, reverting much of the damage to the economy, to see the Canada that I got to see 10 years ago. It will take another, in my opinion, 8 to 10 years. So that means if you're thinking of, what should you do, should you go overseas and work overseas? I say if you're young, if you're, thinking of going to university and so on, I would say even go to university overseas. If you can, go to the States. I mean, hey, if you're Chinese, go to China. If you're not Chinese, go to the States. That's what I would say right now. And if you don't go to the States, go somewhere else where you can get great education and inexpensive. Maybe go to Southeast Asia somewhere. Maybe go to Latin America somewhere that is safe, that you can, where you can learn in English, not spend a lot of money on tuition. And it's hard to already decide what you want to do for a degree, but at least you're gonna have 4 years being overseas, being away from Canada, getting a different perspective of what it is to be Canadian, or to be, or perspective on Canada from overseas, and get that world experience, and then work and make money. Chances are you're probably going to make more money than what you would in Canada, and then come back to Canada to as things improve, come back to Canada with work experience and with money in your pocket, so you can buy a house, and so you can restart your life in Canada. That'll be what I would say if you're younger. If you are older, in or if you are overseas and you're not yet in Canada, I would say that if you're older, unless again you have the means to come to Canada and settle and buy a house, then wait until interest rates uh, go down, possibly next year, and then sure, come to Canada, buy a house in a place strategically. Probably I would say Alberta is still value for money, with a lot of the energy projects coming up. That would be my choice. And otherwise, if you are really in tech, and you're overseas, especially in tech, I mean, finance, everything is tech these days, right? FinTech, everything is, I mean, everything will be tech, in the coming years more so. So I'll still say Canada is probably not your top choice, and unless you have specific needs. I mean, leave a comment, ask questions here if you like. I'll be happy to sort of share my thoughts based on your specific situation and needs. But I don't think that Canada is going to be a great place to be for the next few years. Things will pick up, and I think Canada will become the place it used to be, a place of opportunity. But the government just got too big, and they really ruined it. I have to agree with a lot of the people who say I'm leaving. I would say, I mean, never say never. Don't live for good. I say never coming back to Canada. I would say, people leaving, I think that's fair. You don't want to be stuck in a place where you're not happy. Even it's the energy that you bring, that you bring to work, the energy that you bring to your projects, to school, whatever it is that you're doing around you. You want to be in a place where you're happy, and you're healthy, and so if what it takes is for you to leave the country, then leave the country. But Canada is an amazing place. Canada is a beautiful country, one of the most beautiful countries I've ever seen in my life, and I've traveled extensively, and I vouch for Canada. I think we'll see Canada come back in 8 to 10 years, and I really truly hope so. And I will always like to come back. All right. With that said, I would love to hear what you have to say, or whether you agree or disagree. But I'm glad that I got to share my experience with you guys today. Bye for now. Bye bye.